Hi, welcome. I'm Mart-Marie, and this is Coffee Conversations. Once again, just a place where we share the goodness of God and the oneness with God with just a holy wonder and just step into His incredible beauty. Today, I am so honored to spend time with Marinda Creer, an award-winning winemaker from South Africa, currently living in the US. And I hope that we get to talk a little bit about her winemaking and just how she experienced God and all of that. But yeah, the story might go somewhere else. So let's see. Hi, Miranda. It is such an honor to connect with you today, and welcome to Coffee Conversations.
Thank you very much, Mart-Marie. I'm excited to be here and to have a nice conversation with you and to see where God leads us, in our lives.
Great. Tell me quick. Let's just start with where in the US are you? What you are a winemaker, and what are you doing? Where are you based?
I'm based in Napa Valley. I've just had my 3-year anniversary in Napa Valley, California. It's been an amazing, blessed time here thus far. So I live on the outskirts of town, right on the banks of the river between the vineyards. And yeah, so fortunate, really blessed and fortunate. And it's a beautiful area. And I always say that Napa Valley is definitely a soft landing for South Africans because it's wine industry. The climate is very similar. The people are friendly. They're used to people from all, faces of the earth, of the globe. So yeah, they very, I felt at home from the first day.
I've been to California, San Diego, and Los Angeles, and both of those cities feels like, hey, this feels like Cape Town. I can kind of feel
Yeah,
at home there. But
yeah.
Miranda, I really want to get to your winemaking journey and your time in Napa. But today is a pretty heavy day for you. Yeah, you had a great loss about a year ago, and you don't mind. I would just like to step into that a little bit to just hear about your story and your journey from the past.
Yes. Today is a year since my husband Donnie passing, and it's been a heavy travel year in the sense of the journey that I've been on since his passing. And I thought this morning when I woke up, there's nothing to celebrate that he's passed. If you have anniversaries, you celebrate it. But in a way, I am celebrating because he's with Jesus. I know where he is. He had a huge imprint on my life, and I know on the people around him, his family, his children, our children. So yeah, so it's been hard this year, but through spiritual growth and leaning into grieving, I have grown so much this year. So yes, the sadness is heavy, but that is how it should be.
I don't want to pry and I don't want to push too far. So if you don't want to go there, you just stop and let me know. But if you say lean into the grieving, what does that mean for you?
We in our society, we've unlearned how to grieve. At the moment, I'm doing an 8-week course with our church family here in Napa Valley, and it is about healthy spirituality. And a large part of that is that we shy away from grief. We do not grieve the losses. So losses can be, of course, a dear one, like I'm experiencing, but it can also be disappointments in life. So, and to grieve that, and to really, if I think of figures in the Bible like Job that sat in the ashes because he lost so much, not just his wealth, he lost his children. Think of Jeremiah that wrote Lamentations, complaining to God, why is this happening? Why is it me that it should happen to? We've forgotten how to grieve. You would hear people in the olden days tore their clothes. Women were black for a year, things like that, because it's good to grieve. Because if it's through grief, you grow spiritually, growing closer to God, not medicate yourself with food or alcohol or watching too much TV, things like that, but to really be in the stillness with God and to hear what it is that he wants you to grow through this process and what it is that he wants to teach you. so that you can be there for other people going forward. That is what, and it's hard because you want to run away from it, you want to shy away from it, you want to deny it. Because if I think we open ourselves up to grief, we are so scared, I think, of the immense sadness that will come up in us. But I think that's good if that happens, because as I say, you would then know your dependency on God. For me, it is that I'm not alone, because if I have God, I'm never alone. And that God is for me the bride and the bridegroom, in that sense, that He's my partner in life more than anyone actually else is.
Oh, wow. Okay, so tell me quickly, how long were you guys married?
We were married, we were nearly together for 2 years, married nearly for 10 years, 10 years. But if I think of marriages for 30, 40 years, I mean, that's amazing. But I've always never understood this principle in the Bible, that time means nothing to God, and that He will always, and the promise that I will give you back what you've lost. That type of scripture readings. And for me, the 10 years always felt within our marriage, felt like 30 years marriage, 40 years marriage. It was because we were so close and interwoven with our lives. We enjoyed each other's companies. We grew together within the marriage. We tackled problems head on together. So, and the way it was so important for Donnie to really get to know me and I him, so it was like, you get people who they say they don't need to say a word. They know what each other were thinking because they've been married so long. It was the same with us. So I'm blessed and feel so happy and fortunate that I could spend that amount of time with Donnie. And he has taught me so much through the eyes of God. I learned a lot from him as well.
You've said now you've learned a lot through Donnie, and also through grieving. We experience God in a different way, and we see God in a different way. And I just kind of want to, before we move on, maybe to something else in the conversation, but if you look back over your life with Donnie, what was I almost want to say, what did he mirror from God the most towards you? And then kind of on the same thing is, now that he's been gone, what have you seen about God that you haven't seen before? So what has this lost kind of brought to your attention about God that you haven't noticed before?
Yeah. Oh, there are a few things, but I do think that the most was Donnie's servant heart. He had a servant heart. Like, when Jesus walked the earth, it reminded me how a little bit of that Jesus was, or still is, it's that servant heart that he had towards me and the people around him. And we speak a lot about that. It's like this unselfishness, that you are much more important than I am, and learning that. And also, before the few days before his passing, it's as if I think back now that God has prepared me for Donnie's passing. And in that preparation, it's like something sits in your heart and you feel like it's being squeezed, but you also know there's a presence. There are a few things that actually happened, before his passing, that I knew was God, but that the comfort afterwards. We were driving, one of the ones was we were driving from, just went and bought a few groceries, and suddenly, we have been having very deep conversations always. And I told him in the car, I think it was a Monday or the Tuesday afternoon, God's unconditional love is so big that the way that Donnie loved me, I've experienced unconditional love. And how, if that is just a little bit of an example of what God's love is for us, we won't be able to stand upright. And I remember I started crying and Donnie said, "Don't, it's okay, it's just how I love you." But it was the dawned ingrained into my spirit that God's love is so big and so unconditional, that if we can show on earth for each other what that little bit of unconditional love is, we'll live different lives. And I'm so grateful that Donnie could really show me, because I always thought I had to prove who I am. I have to prove my worthiness, because aren't we all like that? We always think we have to prove something. And with God, we don't have to prove anything. With Donnie, I didn't have to prove anything. I could just be. And that is what God wants us to be. He just wants us to be, because out of that beingness, we will flourish. All our talents will just flourish, because we don't have this thing of, I have to prove myself. I can just do it. And if I just do something that I love, that's ingrained in my spirit, I'll be fantastically good. Doesn't matter what. And that I get, I mean, the hair stands up straight. And in my heart, I know that that is one of the biggest messages God wants us to realize. If I can add to that, unconditional love, it's 2 words, but it has huge impact. If I can see my journey as a team leader, as a manager of people, the impact that has had, I can experience when you have colleagues, which is, I mean, they're nothing of you, they just work colleagues, but if you project unconditional love, people aren't afraid to make mistakes. It has an impact. It has such a huge rippling effect, and you don't need to speak unconditional love. You can be it. I think that's the secret. That's the thing, is to be it. And if I think of my journey and how I have my relationships with people, how that has changed, it's profound.
Wow. Do you think, has that changed? Because you said there's this realization that you had about the unconditional love has happened kind of right before he passed away. So this is kind of then a revelation for you for the past year. Do you feel like your relationships has changed in the past year just from getting an understanding of that? So even after his
Yeah.
passing, this is the one thing that you feel like, okay, this was really a big part of what happened.
It is absolutely so, Mart-Marie. It saddens me if I hear, I have friends that are married, friends that were also parents, and we have to think a little bit about how we talk to each other, because or talk about each other, and ask if you really unconditionally love your spouse. Just start there. There's always a critique in there somewhere. There's always a little sting in there somewhere. And it's sad, because for me, that's not unconditional demonstration or the practical walk of unconditional love. Unconditional love is not just, I'll be there when it's trouble. It's like, I'll be there every day when we're alone, when we're in front of other people. So little things like that. So for me, the real meaning of unconditional love just dawned on me in that car. We talk about it, we try our best to be it, but I think it just sank in there the few days before Donnie's passing. And in the past year, it's definitely changed my relationship, because the practical implications of what it really means and how you can walk it out every day has definitely.
Give me an example or two about that walking it out. What does it look like if you walk it out?
A simple example, I mean, around me, I have a work colleague that is a bit ADHD. And because I'm very goal orientated and very focused on my work and very disciplined in certain things, having the love and the understanding that everybody, it's not at your standards. Your standards means nothing to everybody. And it doesn't mean that they will not be also as good, or if they've done it not in the same way. So it's developing that compassion, the patience with people, that everything in the end of the day will work out as it should be. So it's, for me, if I have to think of a physical example, is how to treat a fellow colleague with respect that is very different than you are, and have that compassion. Our children, the same with our children. I mean, I think sometimes parents are so strict on their children because they're scared, because for the future. So they would say, you have to do this, you have to do this. You don't. And if you have compassion and just be there and be an example of God's trust and living a surrendered life, I think that's also what dawned on me this year, is that what it truly means to surrender your life to God. Bad things happen in life. We're not spared of that. But how do you, when you hit that wall of loss and grief, how do you go through that to grow? Because God will take you up. Something else happened, but I can't talk about it now. It's exciting. God is so full of surprises if we just trust Him, Mart-Marie. And I think for us that wants to control everything and that we live in a world with governments that wants to control people. But remember, we're in this world, but we're not of this world. I always say it's God's economy. It's God's government that's ruling. And it's hard to trust that because we want to see tangible things. But we know that's not how God works.
No, no, but He's a good God. He's a good Father. But
Yes.
thank you for sharing that little bit about your husband, and we celebrate his life with you. We're thankful for the time you had together,
Mhm.
and thank you that he could have been a part of this conversation too. So let's get to the winemaking. I think the main reason why I connected with you for this is I heard you shared a testimony a while back about just God and creation and the winemaking. Now, you have been in the US in Napa now for 3 years. How did you and Donnie end up there? You know, you're an award-winning, very highly acclaimed winemaker in South Africa, and now you live there. And from what it looks like on the outside, it looks like you are really successful and doing amazing things. But tell me a little bit about how did you get there? How
Yeah.
how did the doors open to the big US for you?
It's a interesting story. So, Mart-Marie, I was in South Africa doing my journey as most people do. You work and you just do the best that you can. But I've always felt, as I didn't start off as a winemaker in my life. I didn't have the background of growing up on a wine farm, or I grew up in Port Elizabeth. I mean, there's not an inch of a bunch of grapes there when I grew up. I think now near to Port Elizabeth, there are some vineyards, but I don't know really how successful they are. But so it wasn't really part of my background, and going to Stellenbosch University, of course, and I studied Bachelor's of Science, and I did food science. At some point during my studies, I thought, oh, why am I doing this? I don't like food or making food, but I just didn't want to do a normal Bachelor's of Science. I wanted something else with it. And agriculture in those days for women, was like, no, that's for men to do. So I grew up very conservatively, if you can get it in that way. But anyway, so landed up, being a manager of a wine laboratory, which was amazing, loved it. I don't want to go through all of that, but that's how my wine journey began. And I started studying as well because I always knew I would love to do a master's, but I didn't know in what when I was younger, and I just left it, and opportunity came that I could do it within wine chemistry or enology. I was making wine, and I was the business manager of a winery in South Africa, and I could see that the wine industry is on this certain path of trajectory, and with any other industry it's always sometimes very difficult, and then sometimes it's a little bit easier. So it was the normal day-to-day, and I could still do it. I mean, there was no reason that I was looking elsewhere. But in the meantime, I did my PhD, and I uncovered for myself this field of mathematics that you can do with data. But now I have to say, I was not a very bright, I was a middle path child during school. I didn't get A grade for maths or for science or anything like that. And I really had to study quite hard just to do well, So I was really in the middle of the road type of a student as well. But I remember when I did my master's, which was lots of data analytics, and there was this new concept called chemometrics, which was an analysis of chemistry data that is generated by instruments that's just huge. You could never just look at it and say, oh, this is happening. You needed mathematical tools. And I remember speaking to God saying, your mind is so much bigger than mine. You know already everything that we on earth still needs to uncover. And this is nothing for you. Open up my mind. Let me understand the logic which I know is beautiful and simple, but is so complex for me, so that I can understand the inner workings of how this multivariant data analysis work. And it was this journey in my master's degree where the things just were broken up and unfolded for me. It was a spiritual journey. It was a journey with God, because I am nothing without Him. I remember I started working for an international wine company where I was the South African winemaker, where we had to blend a lot of wines. That was the whole core of that. It was finished. It was wine after fermentation, and we had to make various blends between varietals, blends across varietals, and your sensory. And it takes, for a lot of people, it takes years to develop their sensory ability in smell and in taste. And I entered the wine industry, I think 34, 35, didn't have that 10, 15 years experience already on my, with all the sensory. And I've never been a big drinker, I remember my cellar master once told me in the beginning, I said, how do you just taste so easily? He says, well, you have to drink a lot. It was like a joke, but it's not true. You have to taste a lot. So, but anyway, and I remember asking, and then being the responsibility, moving from that, the responsibility of managing a brand, a winery, and where the success of this wine sort of sits centered with you. It's a huge responsibility. And the next conversation in that regard, with the data analysis conversation, I said to God, well, you've put me here because you've opened so much doors. Every step I would do would be a prayerful step. Is this where you want me to be? I need my senses to be developed. I need to get sensitivity of small nuances in wine. So the awards that have been won, it's never me, Mart-Marie. I'm so conscious of God in every step in my winemaking career, because we can lose our senses tomorrow. So it's not me. It is God that helped me distinguish between different aromatics, flavor profiles. Envision, if you taste these wines in front of you, that 3 of them will go fantastically well together. Don't waste your time with the other. It's things like that. And it's really the spiritual magic that happens when I start blending wine, or where I make wine. I always say God was the best winemaker. Teach me how to make wine. I know all the theory and the science,
Yeah.
but the intricate detail of molecular activity that we will never, ever know. So I experience my walk with God in my career as a winemaker very close. Nothing is me. Everything is Him. And that's how I experience it. So this opportunity for Napa came, and I remember for 6 months driving to my winery. I had like a 30-minute, 40-minute travel every day, there and back. I would lament to God, and to make also very sure that this is where He wants me to go, because I know that He can see things in the future. As in Jeremiah, I know the plans I have for you. My thoughts are much higher than you could ever think. But leaving your children behind, these days it's the younger people that relocate, and not us that are in our 50s. But for God, age means nothing. Time means nothing. It's the rules that we put on ourselves. So, and I remember I said, all right, I made a list, and I said, okay, because I've been talking about everybody in the company here in Napa at that time, trying to get to know them. The culture of the company was very important for me, of course. There were other things that are important it's not just salary. Of course, that was a huge thing as well to consider, because to relocate. But I had this conversation with God. I said, can I make a list? And if everything is ticked off in a positive way, on a yay way on that list, we're going. And I remember it was like, I don't want to sell my house. I love my house. Can I just close the doors and have enough and earn enough money so that we can pay the bond and have certain things looked after? There was the salary, because Donnie wasn't allowed to work because the visa is an O1 visa. And the O1 visa is very strict. The requirements are quite high, and your spouse are not allowed to work. They can study, but they're not allowed to earn money. Donnie wasn't, which was, if you think of it, blessing, because Donnie's health was in a way that it was better for him not to have the stress of not working. And everything on that list was ticked off. I even gave the exact amount of the salary. And when when we had the conversation, said, "Will you be happy if we give you this salary?" And I said, "Yes." And that was the last thing it was like, when I finished the conversation, I told Donnie, this is something God wants us to do. So, um, and it was amazing because, God is also interested. He's not just interested in you going to church, you speaking about him. He wants your life to be a testimony of him. So I didn't come and do missionary work here, but the way I ended up here is a testimony of God's goodness in my life. And the people that I've met here, um, I'm thinking of Gisela Kreglinger, Chris Blackaby, the conversations we have had, and still continue to have. Susie Lip from Calistoga that has a blog about God in the vineyard. Just all these amazing people. I always thought, I'm experiencing vineyards and winemaking as a lover of God, and I was never connected with people that felt the same way. And this opportunity came from that. So, and there's another step God has for me, but we can speak about that in a couple of months, I think, which has just been
Yes,
amazing.
it's happening. We will have to come back for this.
Yes, but I've been blessed the wines, I think God has given me the skill to come and correct things. If I think of to install systems and correct things, but also if I have to say that and I'm not being arrogant, to also bring the spiritual atmosphere in a way that I mean, it's difficult here to speak about your Christianity and your belief, but there are ways you can do it, and just be it and change the atmosphere. The influence we have as children and heiresses of God is just amazing.
Yeah, that is just so true. But there's something that it feels to me, and I don't know if you've seen it, but just in the story that you told with Dani and the 10 years that you guys have been married, and you becoming a wine or really invested in winemaking only later in your life, it feels like God has given you an understanding of time and
Yes,
duration of time. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
that's so true, Mart-Marie. God, because I'm always concerned about the future. If I think back, I've always been worried about the future. And God has definitely given me what you've said, that perception of his timing. I think, if you pray that God needs to learn you to develop your patience, oh boy, he will. Because because I think that was also one of the things that
I will never pray.
I did pray for that. And he has tested my patience for sure. Because if you're tested, that's when you develop and trust. Things like, if you have an education, nobody can take anything away from you because it's this education. That's how I grew up. But that's not entirely true. Yes, education is fantastic, but you cannot make your life stand on it. There are other things around it that is even more so important, which is your spiritual growth, your relationship with God, that everyday relationship, and then learning to get to know Him, the knowledge of Him, and the trust of Him. Then all other things starts not to be that important anymore. And if you walk in that, you are successful. You will be successful. God gave me this love in the past year to paint. I've never in my life thought I can paint or make a picture. And isn't that also something to do with time, Mart-Marie? You cannot rush a painting, you know? So he's definitely
Right.
learned me a lot about time, but also God's flexibility in time. That time, it's not on the hour or on the month or on the calendar. That's not how he works. And that I had to develop and grow emotionally and spiritually for a very long time before all these things could be revealed and make work for me. If you get things too early, too quickly, it's arrogance and pride that happens.
And it also feels like when things happen too quickly, like it's my glory and not God's glory.
Yes.
It feels like when then I've done it.
Ye
But now I think, and also the older we get, it's like, you know what, this is God. This is not me.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly. So
but
exactly that. I think and to be humble, not, and false humility is also pride, but to truly know what the meaning is practically of being humble in your everyday work and life.
yeah.
I was very aware winemakers are one of the industries because I'm so ingrained in the industry. You get awards. Winemakers are placed on a pedestal to some degree, hopefully not anymore that much as years ago. And I've seen, unfortunately, how good winemakers have fell down from that pedestal because they try to start doing things on their own. So I've been always very aware of that and being blessed with my knowledge and growth with God, that to always search my heart and growing that awareness every day as you on the path. It's not you saying that, I know it's not me, it's God, it's all Him.
So what I pick up from you is you have absolute love for wine and winemaking. I can your whole face just lights up when you speak about winemaking. What about the process? Is it that you love this much? What about
I think it's the process I love, Mart-Marie, because we are not so much in control as we think we are. And I love it. Every time it's a testimony of God's goodness, of God's favor within me, of God's developed senses within me, because I can recognize it and I can say, yes, thank you, Jesus. It's like the fermentation process, custodians of the process, if I can say that, is now, if you leave it in a bucket, it will ferment anyway. But we have luckily now science knowledge to know that there's optimal temperatures. There are yeasts that has been isolated from certain grapes that will just be the best for those type of grapes. That's what science has taught us, but it's still a process with so many secrets. And I never stop learning. And, so that the whole process, and for me, the whole process is also a reflection of our life in God's hand, the crushing of the grapes. In the fermentation process, it's the change we go under I mean, grape juice is lovely, but wine, because in grapes, there are precursors, flavor precursors you cannot taste or smell. But going through the fermentation process, it's released because now other things like enzymes has a role to play where they split these molecules up. And that's how I see God is in our life, is that we go through this growth process and it's not easy. It can get sometimes hot in a fermentation vessel, or sometimes the yeast has to starve a little bit because when it starves, it produces beautiful aromatics. And that's the same with our lives. Sometimes we have to do without things so that we can produce other beautiful things. Sometimes it gets uncomfortable and we don't like the uncomfortable side of life. We can experience loss, but out of that, we get this beautiful wine with its complex flavors. Because you can make a wine and it can be simple and linear. But if you go through the process and know the boundaries and the things that influences this beauty, that to me is why winemaking. And then of course the aging process, because in aging, in the stillness in a barrel, things happen. It doesn't look like it because there's no physical thing that you can see, like fermentation bubbling and CO2 getting off. But in the stillness of a barrel room, that's where you also find God. That's where I find God. That's utter stillness, and know that in these barrels, the wine are changing. They get depth. They're beautiful, but now they need to develop the depth of flavor. Those things that when you taste it, it lingers in your mouth. It stays there. And that's where also I feel where character, God has worked on my character a lot this past year. I think out of the past year, I've had so much stillness by myself. God taught me to just be with Him alone and not be scared of stillness and aloneness. and thoughts that come in, thoughts that come up. You listen to them. You learn to look and think of your thoughts of something separate. And with God, you dissect them and you remove, if it's not true or if it's not relevant or if it's something that, yes, something I need to work on, or thank you, God, for your grace and your mercy. So for me, that's how I experience always the wine process, and even more so now. And what God can open up for me next is even going to be more amazing. I know that.
Amen. He always takes us from glory to glory. But feel there's two questions that I kind of, and I don't know if it's just one thing, but it feels like when Jesus turned the water into wine, that was the ultimate perfection, the ultimate perfect wine that was ever created.
Yes.
I want to ask, Miranda, how far are we from having that wine again?
We'll have that in heaven when we're with him one day. I don't. There's nothing perfect here on earth. We strive for perfection, but there's nothing. It will be in heaven. I visualize myself, walking with God in
But aren't
heaven.
we? But are we not living heaven on earth right now?
We are, of course.
So we should be able to have a very close resemblance to that.
Well, I suppose, I love every wine I make. It doesn't matter the price point, because you make it the best you can from and to deliver, because you have to deliver to a price point. We have to deliver to a wine style and things like that. So I think with that is we just do the best we can. I remember, I have to tell you this, when I lived in Stellenbosch and I was at a crossroad. And I remember I put myself for a whole weekend away in my room, and I said, I'm not going to come out of here, God, if I don't have an answer, because I cannot go on like this. It was just a crossroad with work, also. Because there were some things that were happening at work that morally I didn't agree with. You couldn't say anything, but and I just felt I don't need the circumstances, but I have responsibilities. I can't just resign. And I think, we have to remind ourselves of things like this that happens to us, and because we carry on and then we forget. So I make a point to always think of all the things in life that has been those crossroads where God. So I have to tell you this if we have time. So I was living in this beautiful security estate in Stellenbosch. And I was walking and talking to God, and he said, what do you have in your hands, Miranda? And I looked at my hands, and I mean, you can say nothing, but that's not. And I looked at my hand and I said, God, what do I have? And he said, I gave you an inquiring mind. So when he said, what do you have in your hands, is not you have a house and a car. What do you have that I've given you? And it made me, I have a sound mind. I have an inquiring mind. That was the step to my PhD. All right. Because, and then he told me, resign. Plow your field. You have to plow your field. I'm trustworthy. So, because I was trying to, sometimes you keep on doing things. I've also read on that another thing. God doesn't always, we talk about like the blessing has lifted and that's why you leave. God doesn't always lift a blessing before you have to leave. You don't always have to leave when things are bad. If I think about
Yeah, the grace has run out. It's
the
time to
grace
move.
is right. We always say, yeah, exactly. Leave when the grace is high, because there's another higher road, and the grace is still there for the people that's left there, And that is something I also had to learn, to be sensitive to that. It doesn't have to go bad. The unmorality or the things that you don't agree with doesn't have to creep up into your throat, that you feel that you are going to get sick of it before you leave, if you understand what I'm saying. But in our growth, I was very younger then in my spiritual journey. So I was looking for tangible things that you close that door, then I know it's not for me to enter. There are subtle cues that God can also give because He wants to train our sensitivity. Okay, so that's the one thing. So anyway, so I felt the grace has lifted and I need to leave, but I didn't have another job. And I thought, and then I started my PhD. And then I remember, Mart-Marie, if you give that surrender, I got a bursary for my PhD. That was so much money. I was asked by a pharmaceutical company to come train their laboratory staff on infrared spectroscopy for a week. I think it was, and the amount they paid me was like 3 months worth of salary. I started my PhD at the end of January at Stellenbosch University. In May, I got a full-time job at this international wine company, and they let me do my PhD as well.
That's what we call favor of God. Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it's taught me, and then you go through life and then you forget it a little bit, and then you try to control things on your own again. And then, there's something that happens that say, wait a minute, just wait, Miranda. Hasn't God always come through for you? Hasn't He always been proven to faithful? When you thought you hit a wall, that on the other side of that wall, it was just beautiful. So, and it's a journey every day. I think we never arrive. We'll only arrive in heaven one day, Mart-Marie. The perfect wine will be in heaven, but what we can do on earth now is to do what God has given us in our hands and make the best we can of that.
I think, Miranda, a last question for you. It's a big question that I have for you. Is it feels to me like the love for winemaking, and I almost want to say Miranda's purpose and what God has created you is something to do with shifting and changing the way the world, first of all, see wine. And then also there's something about systems in winemaking that who you are and the way that God has kind of set you up is challenging the systems. It feels like there's a little bit of an artist in you, and you in the artistry of what you bring to winemaking is challenging the systems. Do you feel that some of that is true? Can you speak into that?
I do think some of that is true. If I think of part of my PhD was in natural fermentation, just to see what is in there. Is it better than our curated commercial yeast type of fermentations? And what are the risks in that? For instance, when you do natural fermentation. So for me, that was definitely, there's definitely it's a creative occupation, very creative occupation. I'm very close to God always in this process when I write about it, when I practically do it, when I speak about it. But what I'm very aware of, my identity, Mart-Marie, is not always a winemaker. I had to go through this process, and this is also this year has taught me about that. What is my identity is in God. I'm a spiritual being in God, and we have to be careful that we do not find our identity in the things of the world. Because tomorrow God can push me in a different direction out of winemaking. I don't know. uh, um, so it's just to be a vessel in His hands and to do what I believe He is asking me now to do in the place I am now. And for me, it is easy. It comes easy. And that's why God has placed me in that, to talk about wine and my spiritual journey and connecting that for other people through, because I know, and I say I know because people tell me my passion I have for wine. You're not the first one that says that.
Your face just lights up.
But it's the passion for God I have because it's a God creative process, for me.
Yeah.
And you can speak about, because it's creation, and you can speak about it without offending. And sometimes I don't mind offending people, but if you're in a professional world, you have to be careful. So I think for me, if I have to say my wish or my desire is that people would rather say there's something around Miranda that is just supernaturally different in in the things that she does with wine and how she talks about wine, and hopefully meet God through that.
Yeah, well, I think that's happening. Well, yeah, I think the influence you have where you are is way bigger than you might realize.
Mhm.
And God is continued to lead you step by step. Yeah, it is just such a beautiful journey. But I so want to thank you from the depths of my heart for this conversation. Thank you. Just there's so many little nuggets like I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to write this down. Are you ever going to write a book?
It's interesting because somebody else also asked me the same thing some weeks ago. I wouldn't mind to write a book, but it must be to the glory of God. So yeah, it must be about his journey in my life and a testimony for other people. So maybe, I love writing. I'm not that good at it. I still practice. I love writing about wine. If I write tasting notes, I hope it's in a way that people would just really love to taste this wine.
Enjoy it.
And enjoy it. So I do love writing, but I've never seen myself as a writer. But then God does. He gives you the skill when the time is ready.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I wanted to ask you about the future, but I'm not gonna do that. We're just gonna enjoy the now and just say
Mm.
thank you, Jesus, for this amazing, incredible time. Miranda, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your passion and your love with us. Thank you for sharing Donnie with us. And may you be yeah, not may you be blessed. You are blessed in your coming and in your going, and
Thank you
God's
so
love is
much.
so evident in your life. And thank you so much for just chatting with me today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Talk to you again soon.
Bye.